A farmhouse attic in the French countryside, decades after the war. Renovation workers pulling up a section of floorboard find a shape wrapped in oilcloth, buried beneath dust and decades of undisturbed silence. Inside sits a suitcase, and inside the suitcase a compact radio transmitter, dials frozen in whatever position its last operator left them. Its serial plate identifies it as a Type A Mark II, a set once dropped by parachute into occupied France to keep a resistance circuit connected to London. Nobody who lived in this house after the war ever mentioned it. Whoever hid it either never came back, or decided some things were safer left buried. It has sat there silent since roughly 1944. This is not where the story of Britain's secret war ends. It is where thousands of individual objects, each one once capable of getting its operator killed if discovered, quietly scatter into an uncertain post-war afterlife. By 1945, the Special Operations Executive, Churchill's wartime instrument for irregular warfare across occupied Europe, had built and distributed an extraordinary quantity of clandestine communications equipment. The organization's suitcase radios, compact, battery-adaptable sets built to slip into a resistance safehouse without drawing attention, had connected agents and local resistance networks to London across France, Norway, the Low Countries and beyond, sending Morse code traffic that coordinated sabotage, tracked German troop movements and, in the tensest moments, warned agents when a circuit had been compromised and it was time to run. In Norway alone, the wireless network had grown steadily more sophisticated as the war progressed, expanding from a handful of scattered operators in 1941 to roughly 60 operators spread across the country by 1945, a communications web dense enough to coordinate everything from routine intelligence reporting to the sabotage operations that famously targeted German heavy water production. But that was only the beginning of the problem the organization now faced. SOE itself did not survive the peace it had helped secure. Political pressure had been building for over a year. Senior figures in the rival Secret Intelligence Service, viewing SOE's wartime independence with open suspicion, and Winston Churchill's electoral defeat in July 1945 removed the organization's most powerful patron from office at precisely the moment its usefulness was being formally reassessed. On 15 January 1946, SOE was officially dissolved, its personnel and, critically, its physical assets distributed across a landscape of competing successor interests almost overnight. The documents reveal something the popular memory of SOE rarely addresses directly: what actually happened to the equipment itself once the organization that built it no longer existed. A portion of SOE's personnel, roughly 280 officers according to post-war records, transferred directly into a newly formed Special Operations branch within the Secret Intelligence Service, taking institutional knowledge and, in some cases, specific equipment and technical expertise with them into an organization that would, within a few short years, be running an entirely different kind of clandestine radio operation against a new adversary in Moscow rather than Berlin. Picture the transition at Baker Street headquarters in those final weeks of 1945, filing cabinets of operational records being sorted for transfer or destruction, workshop benches where technicians had once modified radio components now being cleared, and crates of surplus suitcase sets, equipment that had cost resistance operators their lives to keep hidden, being catalogued for disposal like any other item of wartime military surplus. Another problem soon emerged, one considerably harder to resolve than sorting equipment in a London office. Not every radio SOE had distributed during the war could simply be recalled. Sets parachuted into occupied France, Norway, Belgium, and elsewhere had, by definition, been deliberately hidden by their operators, buried in gardens, concealed beneath floorboards, walled into farm buildings, precisely so that German search teams would never find them. The stakes behind that secrecy were not abstract. German counterintelligence had, at points during the war, successfully captured and continued operating SOE wireless sets under duress, most notoriously across the occupied Netherlands, where captured equipment was used to send false traffic back to London for close to 2 years, luring dozens of agents into German hands before the deception was finally recognized. Once the war ended, and the operators who had hidden their own sets either moved away, were killed before liberation, or simply chose never to speak of what they had done. An unknown but likely substantial number of these sets simply stayed exactly where they had been hidden, their locations known to nobody still living. Yet the most consequential use of the surviving equipment and expertise had nothing to do with museums or memorials at all. As the wartime alliance with the Soviet Union curdled into open Cold War rivalry, within just a few years of SOE's dissolution, the same clandestine radio expertise that had once supported the French and Norwegian resistance found new purpose supporting agent networks operating against Soviet-aligned targets across Eastern Europe. Former SOE wireless instructors, and in some documented cases physical equipment derived directly from wartime designs, were absorbed into early Cold War intelligence operations, the technology and the tradecraft surviving the organization that had originally built them by simply migrating to a new employer with a new enemy. What followed for the individual sets that were eventually recovered was a far quieter fate than their wartime service had been. Some were formally decommissioned and destroyed as a matter of security policy, denying any future adversary the chance to study British clandestine communications design. Others were retained by the intelligence services themselves as training aids or historical reference material, never displayed publicly. A small number eventually made their way into museum collections decades later, donated by aging former agents or their families once official secrecy requirements had finally relaxed enough to permit it. Objects that had once been capable of getting their owners shot, now sitting behind glass, their dials still frozen at whatever frequency they had last been tuned to. But one detail about the concealment itself rarely makes it into the official histories. Resistance operators trained in SOE tradecraft were taught not simply to hide their sets, but to hide them well enough to survive a thorough German search, which meant, in practical terms, choosing locations difficult enough to find that even the operator's own family sometimes never learned where the radio had gone. That same careful concealment, designed to defeat wartime searches, is precisely why so many sets remained undiscovered for decades afterward. The skill that had once kept an operator alive became, unintentionally, the reason their equipment simply vanished from the historical record for a generation or more. Back in that French farmhouse attic, the radio found beneath the floorboards offers no note, no explanation, nothing beyond the object itself and the silence of whoever placed it there. Local records suggest the house changed hands twice in the decades after the war, each new family apparently as unaware of what lay beneath their feet as the last. Whether its original operator survived the war at all is, like so much of SOE's individual story, simply unrecorded, debriefing assessed as an equipment demobilization and institutional transition problem rather than a simple decommissioning exercise. The post-war fate of Britain's clandestine wireless network reveals three defining pressures and one enduring mystery. First, SOE's own dissolution in January 1946 was itself a political outcome as much as an operational one. Its wartime independence, prized during the fight against Germany, becoming a liability once peacetime intelligence priorities reasserted the primacy of a single, unified secret service. Second, equipment distributed under wartime secrecy could not be recovered with the same completeness it had once been distributed with. A radio hidden to survive German searches was, by its very design, difficult to relocate once the war that justified its concealment had ended, leaving an unknowable number of sets simply lost to time rather than formally accounted for. Third, expertise and equipment alike proved more durable than the organization that created them, migrating almost seamlessly into Cold War intelligence work against a new adversary, a continuity that rarely appears in the popular telling of SOE's story but shaped the earliest years of Western clandestine operations against the Soviet Union. The enduring mystery is the one still, occasionally solved by a renovation crew somewhere, in rural France or Norway decades after the fact. Some number of these radios, precisely how many nobody can say with certainty, remain exactly where their operators left them, silent transmitters waiting in walls and floorboards for a war that already ended a lifetime ago. Their dials frozen on frequencies nobody left alive still remembers. Thousands of wartime stories are still hidden in archives around the world, If you'd like to uncover them with us, subscribe to Beyond WW2. There's always another forgotten story waiting.